Good morning, everyone. We are just going to give it a few more moments to allow more people to join before we commence today's webinar. Okay, good morning, everyone. You are very welcome to today's webinar. Today, what we will be going through is the Building Assessment Certificates process, which as we know in the industry now, is imperative for our high-rise residential buildings. And what we will go through is the golden thread, the digital footprint. We will also talk through ARC's QUOODA platform system and how this can support our clients in the building assessment certificate process. Today's webinar will be delivered by David Hills, ARC's Senior Director, and myself, Tara Brady, the Principal Management Consultant with ARC. Before we walk through today's webinar, I would like to talk a bit about ARC Workplace Risk and who we are. So ARC, we have over 30 years industry experience, industry leadership, and within ARC, we serve as a true extension of your team. We deliver tailored solutions that protect your people, your properties, and your operations for that complete peace of mind. Our approach combines the industry's top consultants with our intuitive QUOODA platform to simplify compliance management and saves you time on your critical tasks beyond that day-to-day support. We guide you through our complex, contentious, and critical situations with confidence. And we provide you with the tools you need and the insights needed to make those well-informed decisions in any scenario. So that's something in ARC that we have a proven track record on and something we very much pride ourselves on in the industry as well. So you can count on ARC for your trusted safety and compliance partner and ensuring that you meet today's ever-changing legislative standards. So on today's webinar, the agenda and what we're going to go through is an overall background on the building assessment criteria and what we've seen to date in the industry with the regulator and current statistics and analysis of where we are and the statistics that the BSR is giving out in terms of your BACs and where we are in the process, how many have been achieved in the industry today, and really what is delaying it. What is the implications for the delay in BACs in the industry? We'll also go through the building assessment certificate process in itself. So what does it involve? What happens after you've submitted that application to the Building Safety Regulator for your building assessment criteria, and working with the Building Safety Regulator on this. So in ARC's experience, what we've seen in our direct correspondence with the regulator, with the BSR in the industry, and what our clients are experiencing as well, and direct information on that process. Something that we will be really deep diving into today is the Building Safety Regulator's expectations. So what we have seen as a direct output from the process, our experience on sitting on working groups with the regulator and what they expect when you have that application put through the portal, and also working with the Building Safety regulator on it. Another aspect that we're really going to deep dive into is what's going wrong. So as we know in the industry, there is a delay in the industry today when it comes to our building assessment criteria. So we need to really deep dive what's going wrong, what are the issues, what are people facing and in our residential high-rise buildings that are resulting in us not having our assessment certificate put in place, our assessment criteria rejected, and what we can do to ensure that doesn't happen, what we can do to ensure that our application meets the criteria, meets what the expectations are from the Building Safety Regulator, and how we can progress in the process. We're also going to go through digital safety case management, because this is an imperative aspect to our golden thread, to our building assessment criteria. So how can we ensure that we are meeting the legal criteria for our golden thread? How can we ensure that we have our online management and storage of our golden thread information? We are also going to then look to the ARC QUOODA platform. So the QUOODA platform that we have in ARC is a risk compliance and safety management software platform. So this supports clients in the industry on meeting all of those legislative requirements, how you can achieve your best practice, how you can achieve your golden thread in the industry as well. Like usual, we will of course have time for questions and answers as well at the end of the webinar. So we do have a chat function that we will be utilising. So please utilise this throughout today's presentation. Ask the questions and we will have plenty of time at the end of the webinar as well to walk through any questions that come through. David Hills, as mentioned, is ARC's Senior Director and Regulatory Technical and Technology Solutions Expert within ARC Workplace Risk. So David has worked for ARC for over 25 years, and he has a previous experience in local authority, building control, looking after major construction sites, and David is very well known in the industry and respected as well. So he supports thousands of our clients with risk management, demystifying the legislation and empowering them to meet their regulatory requirements. So David is a chartered fire safety engineer and has a huge experience in the industry. He's also the chairman of the government sponsored and FRICS committee. So he has a wealth of knowledge in the industry. As well as that, he has worked at ARC for a significant period of time. So David is very well respected and has great knowledge in the industry as well to date. Okay, so like I mentioned, we want to go through the background. So where have we been in the industry and where are we when it comes to our building assessment certificates? So the Building Safety Regulator, so herein referred to as the BSR, has reported almost 75% of building assessment certificates assessed have failed to meet the required status. So that's a huge statistic in the industry to date. The BSR has also reported having reviewed building assessment certificates for almost 1,500 buildings. So that is within the first tranche of buildings being assessed. So as we know, the regulator put out a tranched system as to what needs to be followed and what needs to be completed. So to date, we've almost 1,500 buildings that have been gone through the application process. 170 of these have been completed. So that is quite a worrying figure. It shows that we have a huge delay in the industry when we have only 170 of these applications that have been completed since the inception of the BSR, since the inception of the Building Safety Act. So we have a number of years under our belts now, and we still have such an insignificant level of applications completed. 125 of them have been reviewed. So this, again, is a worrying figure in the industry, that we have a high level of applications still just sitting in the application process that have not been reviewed, and we have such a low number accepted. So Andrew Saunders, the Operation Policy Advisor for the Building Safety Regulator, a direct quote from him is, "The quality of the applications has been varied, and we've had some very extensive further information requests in order to get that information needed." So on the applications, the regulator is directly taking back requests for information, RFIs as they're referred to, and they're incredibly detailed requirements that are coming back from these applications. I will now pass you over to David Hills, who will go through the Building Assessment Certificate in further detail.
Good morning, everybody. Right, I think those statistics are actually pretty concerning. A lot of people have obviously been blaming the regulator and suggesting it's the regulator's fault. But when you start to look at some of the processes and some of the arrangements and some of the applications that have actually been made, I think it's really important that we actually stop blaming the regulator and start looking inwardly to actually make sure that we are doing everything that we can. But we've got no control over what the regulator does in respect of the time it takes. That's for the regulator to sort out. They acknowledge that they have some significant problems that they've got to overcome. But I think it's really important that we focus on what we can do as an industry to make sure that we are delivering everything that we need. One particular thing I heard the other day was Andrew Saunders, the policy head at the Building Safety Regulator, was actually explaining that on one application that was made, it was a single page. They didn't even accept it as an application because all it said is that we know our building complies. We don't know why we have to do this. So we've got to start thinking a different way. And so what I want to look now is just very quickly at what the Building Assessment Certificate is all about, what type of issues are also coming through. So, okay, so the Building Regulator is actually going to assess your particular building when you are told to do so. So your application will be made. You do not have to make the application now unless you've been informed that you have to do it. So when you are told to do so, you must then submit your application to the Building Safety Regulator. And the first thing that they're going to do is to do a very, very quick check. They're going to make sure that they've actually got some information from you and some of the key elements of their application. They are going to assess effectively whether you as the PAP, as the principal accountable person, is actually meeting their legal duties under Part 4 of the Act. Effectively, are you delivering all of the requirements of that particular part of the Act? And that application has got to include some key elements. You're going to have to pay an initial fee. It's not going to be the final fee that you pay, but there is an initial fee of £302 that you must submit. You must also then submit your most recent safety case report, not the original one, your most recent. So if you are reviewing your building on a regular basis, which you should be, then they want to see the most up-to-date safety case report. If, for example, in 2 years' time, you're still using version 1 of your safety case report, the regulator has already stated that that would be seen to be and looked at in a very dim light. In addition, they want to see the most recent resident engagement strategy, and the same concept applies there. And in addition, they want to look at your mandatory occurrence reporting system. So there are the 4 key areas, but there is one other area that they are asking for, and that is to make sure that you confirm that the key building information that you submitted when you registered the building is still correct. Now, there's not a problem if it's wrong. If it's wrong, then this is the opportunity you can tell the regulator, oh, we made an error when we submitted our key building information. We've got clients, for example, who suddenly who misunderstood the height of the building, and therefore at this particular instance, they were able to then take that and ensure that the information that they're now providing is appropriate. Now, after submitting that application, the Building Safety Regulator may ask you to provide additional records or other documents or information called an RFI. Now, these requests for information are also known as a more information request. I don't know why we've got the two different versions, but they are. Is effectively a process by which the regulator is seeking further information or clarifications because what you have provided isn't sufficient. They have set out certain requirements, and so effectively that request for information is there to actually allow you to actually extend what you provided them, and actually clarify certain key points and actually prove that actually ultimately you are managing the building safety risks effectively, and you have to provide that information within a defined period of time. Now, that defined period of time in our experience is generally around about 7 days. You will receive the request via email, so you need to monitor those particular emails if you are a PAP. And as I said, you need to start looking at how that information can be gathered. I should point out that in our experience, and of the 45 building assessment certificates that have been issued, I will very proudly say that ARC have 5 of those. All of the information is typically around about issues relating to structure and fire risk assessment issues, whether they've got the right assessments in place or whether there are issues that are pretty obviously highlighted in the actual assessments, but they wanted to find out whether action has actually been taken. The next element tends to be focused around safety management arrangements, including issues such as competency management, and then very specific issues relating to issues such as compartmentation, external wall details, and your fire strategy. And then the other element as well, it seems to be focused around how you are managing and maintaining the particular requirements. And then we have had a few issues relating to resident engagement. What we have seen, and again, in our experience, clients who proactively develop robust safety documentation and use an electronic platform, such as our QUOODA platform, before being notified to apply, i.e. they are well prepared, they tend to be more successful, and again, in our experience, tend to have a lower level of information that they have to provide the regulator. Now, something's gone. Here we go. Right. So you have to provide that information. In addition to that information, they may request a meeting, whether that's virtual or in person, to discuss your particular application. And then in addition to that, and it's very rare, they may ask you to actually provide them with a demonstration of what systems you have. For example, how you store and manage your safety case information, how you store and manage all of the information relating to the essential equipment you have, and how you manage and control all of the assessments and the control measures that stem from them. So that's the key process. You are going to probably get asked for information. You need to be able to provide that information quickly. It's therefore better to have a system in place that ensures that you've got all that information available. And if that isn't going to be the case, they are going to therefore look to see how they can deal with your application. And effectively, you've got 3 outcomes on what they are going to find. First things first, if everything is okay, if you provided the information within 7 days and they are satisfied, then as long as they are satisfied that you are meeting your legal duties under Part 4, then they will approve your building assessment certificate. Now, once they've approved it, the PAP must display that assessment certificate in a prominent place within your building so that residents and others can easily see it, and they suggest it's probably best in an entrance lobby. If though they are not happy, then there will be additional action that will need to be taken. And so if those issues are of a nature that the regulator believes that you can fix them promptly, then the regulator will give you a notification to actually tell you to do that. And they will set out certain deadlines for you. If you meet those deadlines and you are satisfy the regulator with the information, then the regulator will then again issue you and approve you and deliver a building assessment certificate. And again, you must display that. If though they are unhappy, then the building safety regulator will refuse your application. Now, when they refuse your application, or if they refuse your application, then basically they are suggesting that you are not meeting all of your legal duties, and they will give you one of two things. Firstly, a contravention letter or a compliance notice. The letter is a less formal approach. A notice means that there is legal standing sitting behind it. And that compliance notice will tell you exactly why your application is being refused, and the issues that need to be fixed and the deadline by which they need to be fixed. Ultimately, when you receive a compliance notice, though, then the PAP must also display that within a very prominent position, such as an entrance lobby, so that residents can easily see it. So there are three types of outcomes: approval, a maybe, and then a refusal. You can always turn the maybe into approval as long as you actually respond positively and quickly within those particular deadlines to the regulator. Those who ignore it, those who believe that they know better, well, knowing the regulator, they will issue a refusal notice. So what are the key elements? Well, we mentioned earlier that the key elements is to actually deliver your safety case report. And it's around the safety case report that the problems have actually been, because a number of safety case reports have not been setting out the right level of detail. So I just really want to focus then on what the safety case report needs to do. It provides a narrative. It provides a narrative of your safety case information, all of the information you hold about the building, the systems, the people, the competencies, etc. It sets out how the building safety risks for a high-rise residential building that's in scope within the Act, how they are being managed, and then it sets out very clearly and justifies to yourself as well as to the regulator that the building can continue to be operated and is being managed safely. So effectively, it forms that integral part of your building assessment certificate application. And to be honest with you, the issues that we have seen from some clients and some potential clients stems from the fact that their safety case report probably doesn't meet all of the criteria that the regulator has set out. And it basically means effectively that your safety case information and the systems that you're using to manage that safety case information probably aren't where they should be. So one of the things I just really want to quickly go through, and I'm not going to spend too much time, they'll be on the slide deck that you can receive a copy of, is actually the guidance that's actually been issued by the Health and Safety Executive on how you should develop a safety case report and the criteria that needs to be included within your application. So the first thing that the regulator wants to see is some basic building description and information. They want to see also who is responsible for the building, who's responsible for the building's management. They may not be the same person. They want to see very clearly details of the design, the construction methods, and the materials that have been used. One of the major areas of concern from the regulator, and they announced a couple of weeks ago, an article in Inside Housing, for example, they are extremely concerned that the industry hasn't grasped the nettle in respect of structural assessment and structural condition. And they want to see a very good detailed description of the structural nature of that building, your building, and its condition. Clearly, we've got to outline the fire safety measures that you have within the building and their status, as well as the results of your fire and structural risk assessments. We really want to make sure that people understand structural risk assessments are essential. It has been one of the major concerns from the regulator, as I said, that people are not considering structure. Everybody knows fire. Not many people are actually dealing with structure. They want to see your emergency plans. They also want to see your safety management system. So they want to see how you are managing, what policies and what procedures you have in place, and what systems do you have in place to assist you in that management process. They also want to look at, and very importantly, details of any building work, any refurbishment, and any remediation work that has been undertaken on that building. So as I said, the regulator has then taken those particular areas and produced a very detailed set of guidance criteria upon how they are going to effectively mark the various elements of the evidence that you provide them as part of your building assessment application. So the criteria actually sets out and how each of the teams that the regulator has will look at each particular application. And they have 5 particular areas. They have the Building Safety Regulatory Lead, who will make sure that all of the key elements are in place within your application. And they'll have this multidisciplinary team, which will include a fire assessor. They will look at some very key areas relating to purely fire and report back to the regulatory lead, as will a structural assessor, as will the resident engagement lead. And where a building is complex, or where they do not believe that they have the competence in-house, then the regulator will then go out to selected contractors to support them. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on the next 4 slides. You'll be able to see this, but you can see the type and level of detail that the regulator is expecting. If you do not meet all of the requirements, the applicable requirements, in your application, then that's the position that they are going to ask you to provide more information, or they may not ask, they may just refuse your application. So areas that you perhaps need to look at as well, which often gets missed, is how have you obtained the information, or at least tried to obtain the information. So for example, one of our clients had a 1950s building. They made strenuous efforts to talk to the local authority. The local authority were no longer in place. It's a different local authority. The new local authority didn't have the old or previous local authority's records. Luckily, they found the architect and the structural engineer. They contacted those from the original design, but those organizations were unable to support them because they didn't hold that information. They'd got rid of it. So effectively, our client had used all reasonable efforts to try and get information. They actually set that out, and actually the regulator has accepted that and seen that they've done everything that they can in order to get the information, whilst recognizing that they might have to re-engineer certain key areas. I think the other element as well that the regulatory lead is going to look at is how are you managing change within the building, and how are you monitoring performance? They want to see how you can deal with, very specifically, continual improvement. How can we actually take what we have at the moment, and our safety case report may indicate, for example, that I need a compartmentation survey, or I need to review our fire strategy. Well, what are you doing in order to deal with that? And so they want to see how you are monitoring performance and how you are managing change within your building. The fire assessor is clearly going to look very specifically at fire assessment and fire safety issues. They want to understand details of your fire strategy, if you have one. How was the building built? To what standards was the building built? What's its current use or uses? I also want to actually look very specifically at all of the key areas, such as external wall, your fire protection arrangements, your evacuation strategy. But we can't just detail what the strategy is. We have to justify that strategy, to ourselves, but also to the regulator as well. And please don't forget, we ought to be looking at what facilities there are for the fire service. Now, the structural team are going to be looking clearly at the structural side of things. They really need to understand the changes to that building, how those changes have manifested themselves. Did they affect the structural condition or the loading within that particular building? And they also want to understand what the structural condition is and the findings of your condition surveys. That's a really, really important part, as well as making sure that your structural risk assessment is in place. Now, some other elements as well include things such as special conditions. So does your property, or is your property built using, for example, a large panel system? Or do, for example, you have gas within the building? Or do you use certain modern methods of construction? That's really key, and the structural engineers within the Building Safety Regulator will look at those particular elements and how do they impact the safety assessment that they will be undertaking. And have you considered those? Now, the resident engagement lead, again, will look at a whole host of different areas, but very importantly, they want to look at very specifically the relevant person's demographics for your specific building. Generic, a one-size-fits-all resident engagement strategy is not going to be satisfactory as far as the Building Safety Regulator is concerned. I think it's really important that you also explain how you consult with the relevant persons. And consultation isn't just about letting them know what information that you're going to provide. It's actually taking feedback from them. Now, the last couple of teams are going to be looking at, for example, your mandatory occurrence system. What type of system do you have? How do you access and how can the residents access that particular system? And what are you doing, or what systems have you in place in order to monitor and manage mandatory occurrences in now and in the future? So you can see the document that's freely available online. Admittedly, it only came out in December last year, but it is a document that sets out exactly what the application needs to include. And therefore, we should be looking internally rather than blaming the regulator. The regulator has told us this. Initially, the regulator said that they were never going to do this because they were frightened that people would just focus on those key areas rather than actually focus on their particular buildings. But I think the regulator decided back in December that there were issues, there were problems, and they have therefore produced this information, this criteria document, and it's well worth looking at that particular document to see the length and depth of information that the regulator is certainly looking for. So what's gone wrong? Well, again, with our discussions with the regulator, they've made it very clear that they have not been impressed with the quality of the assessments. They said that the vast majority have had one or more requests for information from the regulator. In fact, too many, they say, have had 2 requests for information because people were not answering the questions in the time that they need, and many were missing key information. They've been very concerned about the size of some of the application documentation that they've received. They didn't mention the 1-page application because as far as they were concerned, it wasn't accepted as an application. But the size of safety case reports has varied from 732 pages down to 2.5 pages. The 732 page was refused. It was refused because the regulator felt that the team there were trying to put too much information, trying to hoodwink effectively, and hope that if they provide more, then the regulator is just going to accept it. Well, the regulator didn't accept it. They were looking for a far more focused safety case report. And in addition, they've had a 2.5 page report that clearly did not deal sufficiently with the safety requirements. The optimal size, according to the regulator, appears to be around about 40 pages. But please, please, please do not get too focused on the number of pages. It's the quality of the information that goes in there. The regulator recently has said very clearly, and I mentioned it earlier, that most appear to be very, very familiar with fire safety. Less people are familiar with structure. In fact, many structural risk safety case reports have failed to mention structure completely. In fact, a quote from the regulator said, "We have generally had a number of safety case reports that don't even mention structural failure. We've had some where the applicants are just assuming that their fire risk assessment that they've done under the fire safety order is all that they need to do." Clearly, that is not going to be accepted by the regulator. The regulator has also said that there is a significant issue where people are not demonstrating and justifying, they are just providing information. So we need, within a safety case report, to bring all of that information together into a structured argument that says, well, look, if we take all of the potential failure scenarios in our building, we have put measures in place to prevent or at least mitigate anything that comes out of those particular areas. And look, this is how we are managing the building, and this is how we are going to manage the building in the future. So it's about that demonstration and justification process. There are some instances where people have had works and issues that have been raised as action, which is perfectly acceptable within a safety case report, but then not set out plans in which to deal with them. There's been a lack of plans to remediate, and where there are issues, then many of the safety cases that they have seen have not included the requirement to provide details of any interim measures that are necessary whilst you wait for those works and those remediation processes to be completed. And the final element about where it's going wrong is on the resident engagement side. The resident engagement has not been specific to the building. It's been very generic in nature. We ourselves have seen instances where clients have maybe 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5 buildings, and they've decided that across those 5 buildings, they're going to have a single resident engagement strategy. Well, the regulator is not going to accept that. They see that it has to consider the specific needs and preferences of that group of people within that particular building. And I think, as I said earlier, many of the resident engagement strategies have failed to differentiate between what's actually providing information and what is engagement and consultation. And again, the regulator has stated that they've had a number of resident engagement strategies which simply say, this is what we're going to provide and tell people. That's good, as they say, but the law requires more. So the intent of the Act is to ensure that the risks are appropriately understood by the building owner and that they are managed. And in order to do that, you need to understand the risks and issues that have been identified, outline what actions you are taking or are going to take to management. That is key. I think it's also very key that the perspective of the regulator is that building owners now have had plenty of time to prepare. And so they are going to now expect that when they receive their your application, the building owners are going to have to have engaged the right appropriate advisors and, where necessary, they needed to have completed those assessments prior to the application. And the regulators made it very clear, a safety case report that says that activities will be undertaken in the future is probably going to be frowned upon. You need to understand what action needs to be taken now. And the regulator gave us this particular piece of advice, that they've had buildings with very, very poor compartmentation, and that the duty holder didn't put a plan in place to put it right. They didn't have any interim measures in place, and they refused effectively to put a waking watch in or anything else. So the regulator, working with the local fire and rescue service, got them involved, and the rescue service basically said, well, it's very simple. You either put a waking watch in, or we're going to prohibit the use of the building. It's that serious. And ultimately, that particular individual, we understand, received a notice, and ultimately they had to decant their particular building. So what should we be doing then? Well, first things first, when you develop your safety case, you need to be doing it now. You need to ensure that it includes all of the details of fire and structural risks. It needs to include all of the appropriate information about the building, about its management, and very importantly, include those structured arguments to justify the building's use, the building's safety, and its ongoing management. You need to ensure that your safety case reports does include that assessment of structural risks and the condition of the building, as well as your fire-related risks as well. It's still quite interesting how many people are refusing to even consider structural risk as an issue that the regulator is going to be asking for. We would suggest that also you have in place that building-specific resident engagement strategy, tailored to the demographic arrangements and the needs and preferences of that building's residential cohort. You need to ensure that you have all of the necessary assessments, and where those assessments excuse me, have highlighted actions, that where it's possible that you have completed or at least started those actions before you submit your application. By doing all of that, you're going to support your application process. But the final element as well, we would strongly recommend that you ensure that all of your building safety related information, your safety case, which forms an essential part of your golden thread, is available, and has to be available digitally. The regulator has stated that it should be checked. Make sure that you check that information, make sure that it's accurate, and that actually it's appropriate for your building. So I want to switch on then for the last couple of slides on the digital side of things and talk about digital information management systems, and that the role that the government saw or see in supporting the safety case report and managing your golden thread. There is a very clear legal requirement that you must hold the golden thread, of which your safety case will form part of. Now, the legal requirement was that the regulator and the government had to produce guidance to the industry to tell them what they should be doing and how they should be keeping that golden thread. So there is guidance out there called Keeping Information About a High Risk Building, the Golden Thread. And that government guidance states very clearly that you must manage and store information about that building so that it meets certain criteria. Firstly, it must be kept digitally. It should be secure from unauthorized access. It needs to be available when someone needs that information. So when the regulator asks you for information and gives you 7 days, they are expecting you to be able to provide it within 7 days. They don't expect you to turn around and say, well, we can't find it at the moment. Or actually, do you know what? It's in our system and we're struggling to get it off. We need to have that available when someone needs it. And that someone can include the regulator. It's got to be presented in a way that people can actually use it. It's also going to provide that building's single source of truth. That's a hard element because having one system is probably not going to be effective. People are going to have construction information on some systems, and they're going to have operational information on another. Well, that's fine. Those two systems can form that single source of truth by working together. So you've got to make sure that that information is accessible, and finally, it's got to be provided in a simple format that's easy to understand, and it's written in plain English. And that's actually a legal requirement as well within certain secondary legislation that stems from the Building Safety Act. So holding information on a digital information management system is going to be incredibly supportive of your safety case report and your building assessment certificate application. As I said, in our experience, clients who have access to those types of systems tend to be those are the organizations that get fewer requests for information or fewer amounts of information that they're actually asking to see. But in addition to that, they tend to have a more likelihood of actually obtaining their building assessment certificate without any particular major issue. So on that note, then, I just want to spend the last couple of minutes just really looking at our system. Just want to very quickly introduce QUOODA. It's our system. We've developed it in-house. It's an online digital risk compliance and safety management software platform. It's designed to support owners and managers of high-risk buildings and other buildings. It has very, very specific configurable arrangements that ensures that you get that 360-degree compliance visibility just on one screen. It has, as I said, that bespoke capability to configure, and it's very flexible, so it meets your specific needs and your building's specific needs. And it ensures that your safety case information is always secure, available, and accessible. 3 of those 7 key elements that the government has stated that your information needs to be provided. It can also be part of that single source of truth, but importantly as well, it allows you to work on the move. So you're able to actually capture that information, whether it's on a browser or through the actual QUOODA app. Now, I just really wanted to show you a couple of screens that we've got here. These are actually screens that are showing you how you are able to then define for each of your particular buildings the very specific safety case information. You're able then to actually view that information, store that information, manage that information, and monitor it on one screen. You're able to actually therefore just click the button and download it. You can actually therefore take that information, and actually once you've downloaded that information, or if you want to, you can actually send it directly via email to the regulator or another person. But importantly, it allows you to link that information, and you can see all of the documents history. You're able to link that information to risks and tasks. So it allows you to actually ensure that there is a very clear interoperable link between what means compliance and what actions are needed to be undertaken. So that whole process can make life, not only writing a safety case report, a lot simpler, but also capturing that information and then providing and presenting that information to the regulator a much more speedier, much easier way than actually just using spreadsheets and SharePoint and other systems as well. So in conclusion then, for QUOODA, it centralizes your safety case documentation. It's available right then, right there. It means that you can link your compliance-based documents to very specific tasks and actions, and that you're able to ensure that it's accurate so you can verify that information. It gives PAPs and property managers that real-time visibility over your safety case and compliance. It also supports your golden thread of information. It standardizes processes, and it improves escalations and drives consistency. You can have escalations and notifications to say that a document is going out of date, and therefore you're able to actually manage that process and ensure compliance and demonstrate that compliance and control to other stakeholders, including the regulator. But you can also ensure that you get your insurers involved and investors as well, your clients, to make sure that you can see that you've actually got a system in place that allow you to deliver that compliance with confidence and it's scalable. So what are the key takeaways from today then? I think the most important thing is that we can see that there is a significant issue in respect of building assessment applications. 75% have failed to meet the required standards. Only 45 as of the end of July had actually been approved. So that's very clearly highlighted a widespread lack of preparedness and understanding of the regulatory expectations. But safety case reports are key. A good, successful application hinges on your safety case report, and that must include fire and structural risks, building safety management, and importantly, structured justification of the building safety. Be mindful that structural risks are often overlooked. Applications have tended to focus heavily on fire safety and neglected structural safety. We've got to consider them with equal importance under the Act. That resident engagement strategies must be building specific if you're going to get that through. Generic one-size-fits-all approach is insufficient. The regulator has made it very clear that the engagement strategy has to be tailored to the very specific demographics, the needs and preferences of that specific building's cohort. And we also need to make sure that there is clear consultation arrangements and feedback mechanisms. That proactive risk management is essential. If you've got issues that have been raised within assessments and surveys, deal with them, or at least put plans in place to deal with them. Applications that promise future actions are likely, as I said earlier, to be frowned upon by the Building Safety Regulator. But digital management systems are key here, especially when you're trying to manage so much information. Your golden thread and your safety case, it has to be kept digitally, it has to be secure, it has to be acceptable, and the information has got to be understandable. And the last thing I just really wanted to mention is that QUOODA does offer that particular approach. It does offer a 360-degree situational awareness on our compliance. It allows you to monitor, to manage, to view your safety case information. It can drive efficiency, it can build trust, and it's helping a large number of property managers standardize the process and make it much easier to manage that building assessment process. That's really what I wanted to cover. Tara, do we have any questions?
Thank you, David. Yes, we have had a huge volume of questions come in throughout the presentation. So I've kind of gathered together into groups, really. A lot of questions have come through on the overall RFI process, as we obviously have a lot of people on today's webinar that have actually experienced directly in what this looks like. The main query really is where there is that timeline. So as you've advised, we've 7 days typically in terms of a turnaround time for that RFI. What happens if that's just simply not achievable? Or have you experience in this?
Communicate with the regulator, explain why it's not achievable, and then provide them with very detailed plan of when you are going to be able to deliver it, but ensure that you deliver it in the timescales that you're telling them. That's the first thing, the most important thing, I think, in answering that particular question. Communicate with the regulator, explain, tell them what you're doing, and then see how the regulator will react to that. It could be, though, that they're asking to see something that is a statutory requirement. And if it's a statutory requirement, then they're not going to look, very kindly on you not meeting a statutory requirement. So there could be issues in respect of that, but communicate.
Okay, great. We've had a lot of questions then come through in regard to the structural piece and that structural requirement in terms of our safety case reports. The main query really is, and we've clearly people on the call that have submitted condition surveys, why condition surveys are not sufficient in terms of actioning that requirement in the legislation for the structural risks to be required there. Why is a condition survey not cutting it?
Okay, well, condition surveys and structural risk assessments are two separate elements. They're designed to deliver two particular outcomes. A structural condition survey is looking at the actual condition of individual components and whether those components are structurally sound and what action is needed within a particular building in order to maintain those particular structural components. A structural risk assessment is looking at a much more subjective basis and looking at the overall risk in respect of those components as a system. And therefore, a structural risk assessment will actually determine what risks are applicable to that particular building, how those risks manifest themselves, and how those risks are being managed or will be managed in the future. So that's what I would say. You need to consider that the fact that a condition survey is something that is completely different to a structural risk assessment. They are two different purposes, two different outcomes.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks, David. Another aspect of the structural piece was, is it sufficient to have a retrospective structural risk assessment completed that's non-intrusive, or would the regulator be expecting an intrusive structural review of their high-rise risk buildings?
That's a really good question. Now, the guidance issued by the Institute of Structural Engineers is, and that was developed in association with the regulator, was that in the first instance, a structural risk assessment does not need to be intrusive in nature. But that structural risk assessment may indicate that there are certain structural risks that require further investigation, and that may require at a later date a much more intrusive approach. So the guidance that's currently out there is that no, there does not need to be in the first instance an intrusive survey, but if a structural risk assessment highlights particular concerns, particular issues, then it may be that actually that needs to be undertaken in the future.
Great. Okay.
There is no one answer fits all for that, unfortunately.
Yes, definitely. In terms of review of the safety case report, if there hasn't been what's deemed any changes in the building, is the regulator still expecting a review of your safety case to take place?
Yes. If there's been no changes to the building, then that's fine. We can report that there are no changes to the building. But has there been any changes to the law? Has there been any changes to the ownership? Has there been any changes to the management? Has there been any changes to the risks? So, for example, if we've undertaken a risk assessment, a fire risk assessment, most people undertake them annually. Even if you're undertaking them every 2 or 3 years, then every 2 or 3 years, those risks need to be reviewed. And how you are monitoring and managing that and how your safety case report then needs to be reviewed against those particular changes. It isn't just changes to the building. It could be changes to all those areas that I've just mentioned: ownership, management, legal, as well as assessment.
Great. Thanks, David. Just conscious of the time, so I'll just ask one final question. Has been a lot of questions on the fact that ARC has been directly involved in achieving 5 of the BACs that are currently out there in the industry. Just on your experience, what has been the typical timeline there for that cert to come through?
I don't know, to be brutally honest.
Yeah.
I think they're incredibly varied.
They are.
And again,
yeah.
it does depend upon the level of information that you have in order to write the safety case report. If you've got more information and you're able to provide a greater degree of justification, then there tends to be a less requirement for requests for information. And in addition to that, there are generally it's slightly quicker, but the difficulty is that we've not seen a standardized approach, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's naturally dependent on the building risk, so there's no one size fit all here. But thank you for your time, David, and thank you to everyone for joining. Just finally, we'd like to say we have a QR code there if you would like to please take a screenshot or scan it if you were interested in booking a QUOODA demo directly here with our information will be there through that QR code. Any further questions that we didn't get to, we will release also, and the slides will be shared as David has said. So we'll conclude the event, and thank you very much for your time.